So for starters, can you just give me how you define horse race journalism?
I define it as a pervasive conversation in the media as to who's ahead, who's behind, the state of the race now compared to the state of the race last week or 3 weeks ago or a few months ago. So, the term is very apt. It's this conversation about polls and to some extent strategies that might have led to changes in those polls.
So reporters famously try to stay away from reporting exit polls in fear of changing how voters will react on election day. Do you think that the focus on the race and always talking about who's ahead or who's behind can actually change, even if it's not on election day, can change how voters turn out or
I think
look at
so.
candidates?
I also think it isn't just a question of what happens on election day, it's a question of how a race develops. So, constant conversation about polls might lead voters who are on the fence to focus a little bit more on one candidate or another. Potentially promising candidates who can't seem to build up a head of steam might drop out well before they even have to run. We see this at the presidential level sometimes. So I think horse race journalism's effects are very wide reaching. Um, so campaigns are all about creating narratives in any way possible, and one of those paths is to release polls.
How do you think that horse race journalism, we've already talked about how it might affect voter turnout or how they view certain candidates. How do you think it affects their ability to learn more about the candidates and about the issues rather than just who's ahead and who's behind?
I think it's incredibly troublesome for the ability of Americans to learn about issues. We've seen this increase in horse race journalism, and that has come at the expense of journalists reporting on or journalists talking about policy in detail. If we want to think about the minds of Americans and what's in them as they make these sorts of decisions, uh, only so much time is going to be spent. Only so much time can we expect Americans to utilize making these sorts of decisions. And I get the feeling that the horse race stuff is easier to comprehend, but in the long run, it's probably not as healthy for voters, and it's not as healthy as democracy. It's not as healthy for democracy.